Welcome to the course Environmental Impact Assessment. And in today's session, we are going to cover EIE methods pertaining to cultural heritage. So, accordingly, our coverage will include that. We'll look at what's the changing perspective while we're dealing with cultural heritage, and how does that influences environmental impact assessment. Further, we'll look at what's the purpose of undertaking impact assessment related with cultural heritage. And then we'll look into some of the definitions and concepts so that we understand and come to a basic understanding to take over cultural impact assessment. Further, we'll look into what procedure you need to follow to undertake baseline study, and then we'll look into impact prediction and evaluation, what all impacts happen in this domain. So, accordingly, our learning outcomes will include that after completion of this particular session, you should be able to discuss various approaches which are adopted for cultural impact assessments, what's the change in the perspective. Then you should be able to review the purpose of impact assessment pertaining with cultural heritage. Then you should be able to define various key terms and concepts in this domain, and then you should be able to review key aspects of baseline study and then the methods involved. Similarly, you should be able to review various impact prediction and evaluation methods. So our key reference for this is, again, the methods book by Terrible and Woods. So looking at the perspective change, like what's really happening in this domain, we see that there has been a shift in how we look at cultural heritage and how we have been assessing it. So initial concern was, or the approach was mostly to look at the historical component and undertake physical assessments. But now we see that it has changed and it has become wider, and it covers a lot of aspects related with cultural aspects, which includes not only the tangible aspects, but also intangible aspects, the spiritual aspects, the traditional aspects, among many things. So we also see that there's a strong link between cultural heritage and the other environmental components. So these all is also addressed while we undertake cultural heritage assessments. And this strong link, when we say between cultural heritage and environmental components, we may also include like biodiversity. We might look at the landscape, human health and well-being, quality of life, and all those aspects. So while you're going through this, you might also realize that this domain overlaps a lot with other domains. So you will see how it overlaps with biodiversity, how it overlaps with landscape, health aspects, and so on. So looking at the purpose, why we need to undertake this, what's the key objective which we are addressing to this is, like by undertaking this impact assessment from the cultural heritage point of view, we try to provide information to the decision makers about the kind of impact or range of impacts which your proposal would have on cultural heritage. And we make this information available to the decision makers, and so that the decision makers or the project proponents can facilitate mitigation measures, appropriate mitigation measures, and they would also undertake related investment with it. So we see that IFC performance standard also describes the purpose why cultural heritage assessment has to be undertaken. So the key purpose which IFC mentioned is that one should look into try to protect cultural heritage from any kind of negative impact which might happen because of the project activity, and there is a need to support its preservation and then also promote equitable sharing of the benefits, so that everyone who is been using or connected with the resource gets the opportunity to share it equally, whatever is coming from that, whatever linkages, services one gets from that place. So that is what purpose defined by IFC. Further, we see that World Bank Environmental Social Standard ESS 8 also defines the purpose why one needs to undertake cultural heritage. We see that the key purpose they identify is to address the cultural heritage as an integral aspect of sustainable development. So they highlight that the cultural heritage is integral part of sustainable development, and the idea to undertake this is to promote meaningful engagements with the people who are involved, concerning whom we are talking in this cultural heritage aspect. So, looking into some of the key definitions and concepts, we see that UNESCO gives a definition about what is cultural heritage. It says that it is a whole complex of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features that characterizes a community, society, or a social group. So that is how it defines culture. And all of these can also include art, literature, and then the way of life, the rights of the people, and then the value system they carry, the kind of traditions they have, the kind of faith system they have, belief they have. So all that becomes part of cultural heritage. Further, we see another definition given by World Bank, which says that cultural heritage is the current, present manifestation of uh, our human past. So it identifies both the elements. It looks at the tangible heritage as well as intangible heritage. And when we try to understand what is tangible heritage, it's the heritage that is physical, something which we can really touch and can perceive it. So that's the tangible heritage, and something intangible heritage that is not physical, or you cannot represent that in a physical sense, but it has value, and you cannot really measure it with precision. So that's intangible. So World Bank defines both these kind, tangible and intangible, as the cultural heritage. So in this, if you look at the tangibles, so there are various kind which are formally in the legal system recognized a lot and have been traditionally recognized, are the archaeological remains. So when you look at archaeological remains, it covers both the objects which are above or below the ground, which are buried, and it could be the remainings, or it could be the standing buildings, or it could be archaeological sites, individual objects, or it can be a complex building. So all these can be there, and in the image also you can see the examples of archaeological remains. Then there's another term which is commonly used as monuments. So when we say monuments, you would be referring to all the monumental sculptures, paintings, inscriptions, and cave dwellings. Then you have historic buildings and sites. So it can be individual or groups of different buildings, which are in terms of architecture and other things, which are identified here. Uh, there can be also all these building and sites can be in any kind of a context. It can be in urban or the rural context, and then there is also a structure which is like it can have historic or architectural merit, and those structure could be like roads, bridges, canal, aqueduct, which have been studying in histories, and then kind of irrigation system, roads, ancient roads, and so on. So all these are considered. So you also see historical cultural landscape. So you look at work of human being or combined work of nature and human. So you see how those cultural landscapes are there. And these kind of areas, cultural landscape, can be historic, it can be aesthetic, or it can be ethnological or anthropological. It might be related with people's history and way of life. And this would include cultural landscape. Then you might have movable objects like you you can have history or rare books, manuscripts, paintings, and so on could be also there. And then even feature of landscape and townscape can also be included in these things. So here you can also see that UNESCO also gives the description of cultural heritage. So what all things cultural heritage includes, the work of artists, architects, musicians, writers, and so on. Then you can also see the cultural heritage definition given by ICOMOS, where the cultural heritage is seen as an expression of ways of living developed by community and passed on from generation to generation. And then you also see definition here, Council of Europe, which gives cultural heritage as a group of resources inherited from the past, which people identify independently of ownership as a reflection and expression of their constantly evolving values, faith, belief, knowledge, and traditions. So these all definition range of definitions you can look at. When we look at these aspects, so when we are looking at the UNESCO's definition of intangible cultural heritage, we see that it includes, like, it takes care of oral tradition, like how people would have folk songs, how they would tell about the stories, they would express themselves, and then looking at languages as a vehicle of intangible cultural heritage. And they would also include the performing arts of the community, the kind of practices they have, the rituals and festivals and so on, which people celebrate. They all would be included under the intangible cultural heritage. And then not only just that, but the knowledge and practices which are related with how they interact with their nature and then our surrounding. And then it would also include the craftsmanship, the skills, the traditional knowledge which they have. So that also you see in UNESCO provides that. And some of the key areas we see is the Convention of Biological Diversity. It's important to note that even biodiversity and the various components of biodiversity also become very important because of the indigenous knowledge and culture. So the Convention of Biological Diversity of 1992 highlights that. So you could see, like here, pertaining to indigenous communities, what are the other intangible knowledge, intangible aspects of culture which comes here. So this particular convention further highlights in Article 8J to protect knowledge and practice of indigenous and local communities. So it emphasizes that it's important that it's protected, it is conserved for the sake of sustainable development. Similarly, you see Article 10, which again emphasizes the need to protect and encourage the customary use of biological resources as per the traditional cultural practices. And then it also highlights and emphasizes the equitable sharing and fair sharing of all these knowledge and resources. So if you look at these, there's special concern, special attention given to the indigenous people here, aboriginals here. And you see that even IFC Performance Standard 6 recognize the cultural value of biodiversity. So you can see here IFC 6, I've also given you the link to download, as well as you can see World Bank ESS 6 also recognizes the cultural value of biodiversity. So the link is provided so that you can look at the framework which it provides to review it. So here now we have seen various key concepts and definitions, and you see that EIE needs to take care of both the components, the tangible components and intangible components. in the assessment process. So now moving on, we look at the scoping stage of EIA pertaining with cultural study. So what do we really do at the scoping stage? So at the scoping stage, here you have concern about what time period you're going to study, like in terms of what will be the scope for time, what stretch you should study. So you would be looking at the past, present, and future. Then you have to decide how much past, present, and future you're going to look at. And then you also need to decide upon what will be the geographical scope of your study. So will you be including the terrestrial area, coastal area, marine environment. So all these becomes a part of it, but you need to determine what will be your geographical scope. And when you look at different communities on which you will be studying or you will be emphasizing on, so you would be also deciding on which will be the affected communities. So now we see that there is increasing emphasis on integration of EIA and then the indigenous people's interests. So more and more emphasis is made on that. And the key reference to support this emphasis is that you can see UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People, Agenda 21, you also see Convention on Biological Diversity, and you also see Akaway-Con voluntary guidelines. So many of these guidelines we had already seen when we had covered the legislation part pertaining to this, if you may recollect. And slightly giving a minute on which areas to be concerned for Aboriginals and Indigenous culture. So the key points are that you look at the traditional knowledge of the people, you look at like sacred sites, which are important in terms of rituals as well as practices they support. Then you look at the land, water traditionally occupied by them. And then you also look at how are the indigenous people engaged in the entire process, how is their participation, and the key elements about their participation in a very free environment, in the very informed environment, and with prior consent of the people. And then we also see there's provision for funding for indigenous people's participation in many of the countries. And but still there have been key concerns about indigenous communities' ownership, protection, and control of traditional knowledge. So they are the key concerns, so that all need to be taken care of. So that is what you look at when you have affected people, communities when you study. So indigenous people becomes one important area to look into. Then when you're further looking into the scoping, you also see various setting of cultural heritage. So what does really setting of cultural heritage means? It's the surrounding in which the place is experienced, how is the place, where you get the sense of place, and you see how you connect to that place. So that's about setting of cultural heritage, and the definition is given by ICOMOS about the setting of the cultural heritage. That's the immediate and extended environment that is part of or it contributes to its significance and distinctive character. So what really makes it what the setting is, the cultural heritage is of that place. So for the purpose, when you need to analyze such a complex subject like setting of cultural heritage, you need to look, because it's complex, you would need like multidisciplinary approach. You would also need inputs from the experts and the local community. You would also need to look into existing information, and you also need to collect a lot of data. So all desktop studies, secondary study, and surveys have to be taken. And you might also need to look at different oral history, traditional knowledge, and also look at various descriptions which are there in artistic and literature resources as well. So that would be required while you have to really analyze the setting. So we'll also look at another key landscape which we identify as like historic and cultural landscape. So for these, the key references are UNESCO World Heritage Committee guidelines, and then you also see Council of Europe Landscape Convention. Then you also see World Heritage Convention. They also identify, recognize many of the protected cultural landscape. So you see that historic landscape are also defined. Mostly it is defined by all national at the national level. So India also does that from the point of view of the conservation. So one needs to look at each country's legislation and the acts which are there. So you can see here the definition of landscape as provided by UNESCO. So UNESCO defines landscape as an area as perceived by people. So how people perceive it, what whose character is the result. So whatever is the character as a resultant character of the action and interaction of nature and then human factors. So that is what makes it the landscape what it is. And you have lot of tools to integrate policies and practices for the conservation of these built environments that can be done here, and that can be done in case of urban and rural context as well. We also see that historic landscapes are important. You also find another term, historic seascapes, so which is also considered as important. And these are such as like sites of fishing, transport, trade, and then you can also see sites of where the shipwrecks and other things are there. So that's also considered as historic seascapes. And if we look at like historic landscape, defined by United States National Park Services. So historic landscape, if you look at it, what it means is it would include residential gardens and community parks. It would include scenic highway and so on. And it is composed of number of characters with varied features. You can see it that it would be a composite of individual and collective characteristic features which are there in that particular setting. So you can find one case study from Italy. I have given you the link here of how they have undertaken the study of traditional rural landscape to understand this. So there are other, whenever you deal with culture, there's also concern about authenticity and integrity. So for this, in order to understand how technically we define authenticity and integrity, you have key reference, which is International Declaration in the Conference in 1964. That's the key reference here. And you find another key reference, which is NARA, Japan. They produced the document, NARA document on authenticity. So these are key references, and I've given you the link to the NARA document on authenticity. So you can see here values and authenticities, which gives you an understanding and the significance of that. So like what are the really conditions under which the authenticity is dependent upon? So you see that authenticity depends on type of cultural heritage and it's in what cultural context it is. So when you are assessing it, you need to assess it, the authenticity of the cultural element from the perspective of the property and in its context, so that you need to understand how authentic is the cultural context which you're talking about. So there are various factors of authenticity, so such as like form and design, what form and design is there about that, the character of that particular cultural heritage you're looking at, and then what is the material and substance and what kind of use it is put into the tradition techniques, and how it is managed, and where it is, the entire setting of it, and how what kind of language and intangible heritage is there, the kind of feeling you get from the place, and what are the different factors which play together in that. So these all need to be like understood when you're taking care of authenticity. There's another term which you look at is integrity. So authenticity is one thing, and then when you deal with integrity, is integrity which measure like how everything together works as a complete one structure. So various elements, the biodiversity, the culture, the tradition, and how they come together and they maintain the integrity as and act as complete one. So, the measure of wholeness and intactness of the cultural heritage and its attributes. So, you might think of any particular traditional city where you have, like, the city offers certain skills and crafts, as well as the rituals of the people also create and complete environment. So, that would be called as integrity. So, while you're looking at the aspect of integrity, so there are other considerations which you get it from World Heritage properties guide, World Heritage operational guidelines. So, how do you really assess the integrity of a place? So, while you're assessing the integrity of a place, so you would be looking at about the property. What you would be looking at, you would be looking at like what are the various elements which are necessary in that particular context. Like you would be identifying outstanding universal value of those place, and then what size it is, it's considerable size or not, and whether it is giving a complete picture or not. And then what kind of adverse effects can happen on this, and then uh, why we look at the integrity, why integrity is important is to maintain the entire physical fabric of that particular property. And then uh, it's important that you also look at the protection of all the key elements in that, and how that relationship is maintained. So why do we really assess integrity is that uh, because it works as a complete whole. So it's important that you maintain that physical fabric, you maintain those key elements, and you also maintain the interrelationship between them. So there's a difference between integrity and authenticity, which we talked about. So authenticity is where all this kind of like you see that whatever things are coming are how much original attributes are there or not. Whereas integrity is looked at how together these things are working as one complete element or a component. There's another term which we see is the critical cultural resources. So this includes natural areas with cultural or spiritual value, and these could be sacred groves, sacred bodies of water, waterways, sacred trees, and sacred rocks. And it can be natural areas with cultural values, and all these equivalent priority ecosystem services as well. So you can refer to the Performance Standard 6 for this purpose. So you see the critical cultural heritage. This performance standard emphasizes that wherever the project may impact the critical cultural heritage, it is required that it has to be avoided. Such impact should not happen, and if it is unavoidable, then affected community peoples, you need to have consent of that. And uh, and wherever project intend to use the heritage, knowledge, or innovations of the people, uh, they need to inform the affected communities of the indigenous people. So you see how these performance and standards guides the usage of critical cultural heritage. And then it is also seen that it also highlights the participation of the people involved, stakeholders engagement. And it is again, like you have been seeing, it's always suggested that people should be engaged from the beginning of the project. So that adds value, and it really narrows down the later part engagement, because it really is very inclusive and takes cares of a lot of component. So if you'll see the range of stakeholders when you are studying the cultural heritage, then you can have public authorities, you can have indigenous people and local communities, then you can have scientific institutions and individuals who are involved. You can also have religious institutions, NGOs, and also international organizations. And then you can also see the examples related with all these stakeholders, range of stakeholders. So this was about the scoping part. Now we'll look at the baseline studies. How do you undertake baseline studies with respect to cultural heritage? So looking at what's the purpose of the baseline study. So the key idea, why do we undertake baseline study and in this domain, is that we want to identify or the and we want to describe the kind of culture, the nature, and where it is located, and then also look at the value associated with it, the importance that particular culture has to the people who will be affected. And then you also need to comply with the terms of reference for EIA, what all you need to do, undertake it. So you will also look at that, and you also need to see in whichever country you're working, you need to align it with the regulations. And then you also need to decide how you're going to manage the future study, and how you're going to plan your work, and how you're going to manage all the data. And then plus it's important to understand such work will need a lot of coordination between all the team members, community. And then you would need, like if you'll see this particular domain will need you to work with team of social assessment, then also the resettlement team. You also need to work with the indigenous people, aboriginals who have expertise in that, and then also landscape and biodiversity. So it will be a lot of overlapping will happen, so you would need to integrate with that. Then we look at some of the data collection methods for your baseline study. So you have you can take rapid appraisal. So these rapid appraisal helps you for preliminary understanding, and it's fast to undertake. So you get a sense of the place, and you try to identify the key elements. Then you can undertake a desk-based study also, which helps you to have some better in-depth understanding. And then you can also interview the people who will be affected by the project. And then also you can connect with religious leaders in the place, and then also look at people who are specialists in local knowledge. Then you can also look at the ethnographic studies related to your study area. And you need to try to gather oral traditions and undertake field survey. Then you need to also design surveys, and then you might need to have a very specialized survey also if you need to do underwater studies also. So these are different data collection methods. And if you look at like when you need to undertake desktop study, it like we have been seeing, you can use all form of secondary data like international, national, and all kind of databases. You can look at old maps. Aerial photography is also quite a lot used. Photography is used, and then newspaper. All these scientific articles are very handy, and then you can look at the libraries, old maps, and all this. So aerial photograph and satellite imagery is now becoming very important source of data. So if you look at this example here of source of information, at the national level, you can have all the authorities, culture-related ministries and departments and museums and universities, which works. And then at the community and individual levels, you can have schools, religious leaders, and so on. And then here, how the technology is being used, you can see the LiDAR has been used for discovering cities, and how to work under shallow waters also to find out, to delve more into it. Then you can also see some field survey techniques. So you have a geophysical technique. So the purpose is to identify the changes in the character and property of ground which can happen. So you have a resistivity survey, which measures ground resistance to the progress of an electrical current. So how the electrical currents will move across the ground. So you keep checking, and then when there is a change in how the electrical current moves, that will indicate that there is something underneath. You will also be able to identify what is there inside, what's the nature of buried features there. So that's the resistivity survey. Then you also have magnetometer survey. So this also measures the magnetic properties of the soil and is used to identify location of past human activity. So like burning, hunting, and so on. Then you also have field walking, which we had also seen before. So where you, as you walk along the plowed field, you try to collect the artifact, and then in that process you collect and plot material on their location. So you create maps, and then the rate in which you find those elements. So this field walking is said to be very it's rapid. It helps you to understand the things rapidly, and it's also said to be very economical. But all these techniques also have its own limitation. I'm not going to get into it. The other technique you see is the augering, and this is also especially this is used in river valley. So wherever there's deposition and there's a covered with land surface, the land surface is covered, there's some kind of cover, masking of the element which you want to undertake. So in this process, what you really do is like you process soil in a very sequential manner, and then you record what you find. So you create like auger holes, and you prepare the maps for that. Further, another method is testing pits. So you can do hand excavation, and you can create small pits of different varying sizes, and then as per your requirement, and then you can analyze how you're identifying artifacts and what's the recovery rate. So you can also have machine trenching, can also be done rather than just hand. There's other technique which is earthwork survey. So you also have earthwork survey, which also gives you information, useful information. Like you try to understand what's the form, what's the condition of the earth, and it helps you to see like how the all the factors are working, like how is the slope, how is the gradient, and then you also look at the relationship here. So this helps you to examine all the aspects of the profile which is there. So here I have given you the link to one of the detailed earthwork survey techniques, so you can look at that. And there's another one is like find. So whatever artifacts you recover, so that is also used as a technique. But you need to have some legal permissions you would need, what kind of remains you find under the ground or under the sea. So we also see that drones are also used a lot these days to understand the historical structure. So they are providing like aerial platform where you can record historic buildings, monuments, archaeological sites, and landscape. So that usage has also has increased. And further, you can also undertake underwater surveys, and you can do under river, lakes, or marine environments. And whenever you have to undertake underwater survey, you need to have very specialized techniques like multi-beam sonar, and then you also have magnetometry, then also sub-bottom profiling with sonar. So, and all these tools and techniques, what you use, that has to be accompanied with the actual diverse in observations that has to be supplemented, whatever has been done with the machine. Then you also have remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, which are also used. However, you have to have certain, you have to look into the health concerns which are involved in the process. And these kind of uh, techniques can have very intensive data. So you have to also look into how you're going to manage data, how you're going to process these, all these have to be considered. So that was about the baseline study. So now we'll look at how do we determine the importance of the cultural heritage. So this is a very critical step, and often there is debate about um, whether we should rank like this is important number one, number two, or so, or we should just describe in its uniqueness. So that debate is on. And then here we can see one example where certain value has been assigned to heritage resources. You can see very high value, medium, low, and negligible or unknown. So here you can see high value is given to World Heritage Sites, and then also then you see high value given to nationally protected areas, medium value given to the regional important areas, and this. So you might think that what might be important for you in your local context might be given low value here. So that's the problem about this kind of assigning value. So depending on who's the user, from which perspective we are looking at, these values have to be taken care of. You also see ICOMOS also gives you approach for assessing the value of cultural heritage. So it suggests that first you need to look at what kind of national statutory status has been given to that heritage, and then you might also support with professional judgment, and then as much as possible try for objective approach. Then even IFC Performance Standard 8 also gives input on critical cultural heritage. And then it also provides you with the definition of critical cultural heritage, which we have already seen. And so that's about the importance part. Now we're looking at impact prediction and evaluation. So once we have identified various impact, and then how do we really look at its prediction and how do we evaluate that? So what we really look at is what kind of changes will happen to cultural heritage. So, and because of the kind of the project you're dealing with, so will it have any negative impact, and at what stage it would happen, and what will be the significance of it. So that's the key element whenever you do the impact prediction and evaluation. So and all of this, like impact prediction on tangible and intangible, will depend a lot on the context which you're dealing with, and then it will also vary with the resources, the recipient resources where this impact is happening. So that will also make a lot of difference. So you see ICOMOS also gives you guidelines for identifying the impacts. And then you see that it gives you list of sources which can have impact on your cultural resources, like you can have large projects, like huge construction projects of roads and bridges and all, which can have. Then you can also have a change in culture because of the change in the policy. Then you can also have impact because of the a large scale urban development, and then also because of the tourism also there can be changes. So you see what kind of activities can bring changes, and ICOMOS gives that. Then you also see World Bank also gives you like which of the sectors have major impacts on the cultural heritage. So you have energy, communication, transportation, water. sewerage and sanitation, urban development, industry and mining, agriculture, all these are said to have impact on cultural heritage. So there are certain areas you can see that they have negative impact on tangible cultural heritage, like um, you have when you remove the archaeological deposit, then so that also has negative impact, and this can especially happen uh, during the ground investigation, site clearance when you're doing in your project, and also while you're doing the construction stage. Then the impact can also happen on the setting. We learned about what is setting, so impact can also happen on the setting. And again, it can happen at any stage of the project, construction stage, site clearance stage, or even the operational stage. Then you see that there can be also disturbances to the archaeological sites, and the disturbances can be also on the underwater sites also, and again during all the stages of the project. So you see all these examples are given about what different negative impacts can happen. So you can see a range of impacts which can happen, negative impact. And you also find ICOMOS also gives another list of possible impact on the indigenous people related with cultural heritage. So, what kind of impact it can have is like it can affect the continuity of the customary use of the biological resources. It can have impact on the preservation, protection, and maintenance of the traditional knowledge, their innovations, and then it can also affect their sacred sites, and it can also influence their how they exercise their customary laws. So those kind of impacts can also happen on indigenous people. So in this particular stage, you also try to find out when you are doing the impact assessment, you see that what kind of activities will have what kind of impact. So there are a lot of project activity, like when you're taking the land, when you're excavating, when you're doing construction. So all that can have impact. So that those are very key elements when you're doing EIA. And you can arrange all these in a matrix format, and then you can also show what kind of positive impact, what kind of negative impact, direct, indirect impact can happen. So there are also guidance provided in that direction. So that also you can see how you determine the magnitude also. So you can fix it like what is the major, moderate, or minor, or negligible. So there are other guidelines also which are available. So you can look at the World Heritage Site Operational Guidelines. You can also look at UK Design Manual on Roads and Bridges. That also gives you on the cultural aspect. Then you have UNESCO World Heritage Committee guidelines also which are there. And you would also find IFC Performance Standard 7 also, which gives you information. So we have seen all like a range of things. So we'll wind up for today. So summarizing what we covered, we looked at the change in perspective, like how culture was seen before in terms of assessment we did, and then how we looked at different purpose of undertaking cultural assessment, and then we looked at definitions and concepts. Then we looked at range of methods for baseline study, what's the purpose of baseline study, and then we looked at different impacts and how do we evaluate it, how do we look at its significance and magnitude and so on, and what range of impacts are there. So that was what we covered today. This was our key reference for this purpose. And these are the suggested watch and read. So, winding up, please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about any concerns you have. Do share your opinions, experiences, and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co learning with you while exploring AI. Thank you.